Welcome students. Now we would today start with a quick revision of the chapter Poverty. Poverty. Poverty shows the inability of a person to meet his minimum requirements of existence, which basically includes fooding, clothing, education, housing, and health facilities. Poverty can be defined in two ways. There are two measures of poverty: relative measure and absolute measure. Relative measure. Relative poverty refers to the poverty of the people who are comparatively poor as compared to others. So, relative poverty is a concept which makes a comparison between the poverty of two people. The next is absolute poverty. It refers to the total number of people who are unable to fulfill their basic minimum needs of existence. Absolute poverty measures the people who are in chronic state of poverty or who are facing poverty at a persistent level from a long period of time, unable to fulfill their basic minimum needs. Then we come across how is absolute poverty measured. There are two criteria to measure absolute poverty: minimum calorie consumption criteria and the minimum consumption expenditure criteria. In terms of calorie consumption, it is regarded as people in an rural area, if unable to provide themselves with 2400 calories per person per day, is regarded as poor, whereas a person unable to meet the basic calorie requirement of 2100 calories per person per day in urban area is regarded to be as poor. Minimum consumption expenditure criteria. It says that the minimum consumption expenditure should be rupees 972 in rural areas and 1407, that is 1407 in urban areas. Or on a daily basis, it should be 32 rupees per person per day and 47 rupees per person per day in urban areas. So the calorie requirement, if you see, is higher in rural areas and less in urban areas, because in rural areas people are engaged in more of physical activities, whereas in urban areas and rural areas, if you compare in terms of consumption expenditure, the per capita income either on monthly basis or on daily basis is higher in urban areas. The reason being that the general price level in urban areas is higher. Now we come to the estimation of poverty line. Poverty line is an imaginary line that is helpful in measuring the extent of absolute poverty into the economy. Now, how does poverty line helps in measuring poverty? Poverty line basically is an imaginary line which divides the population in two groups, right? It divides the population in two groups, APL and BPL. BPL refers to the below poverty line people who are unable to fulfill their basic minimum needs of existence, and APL refers to the above poverty line people who can somehow manage their basic minimum needs of existence. So, poverty line divides the population into two groups as poor and non poor, as APL and BPL. Now, we would deal how poverty is caused, the basic factors causing poverty. Before that, let me quickly define vicious circle. Poverty is generally known as a vicious circle. Vicious circle means a chain of cause effect relationship where a particular factor becomes the cause of a problem and the consequence is generated, which in turn becomes a cause for some other problem. So, it is a chain created where a particular factor leads to some other consequences or problem, and that consequence becomes a factor for some other problem, culminating into a trap like structure of cause effect relationship. Causes of poverty. Rapidly increasing population. As the population increases, amenities cannot be supplied at the same rate. As a result, the people are deprived of meeting their basic minimum needs. Next, low level of national output. The national output or the total production that takes place in the economy. A major portion of the production is being consumed. As a result, leaving a small margin of saving and investment, thus leading to no level of national output and production in the coming year. And thus we remain in the grip of poverty. Rise in prices. The continuously rising prices makes the goods and service unaffordable for majority, thus keeping them deprived and poor. Unemployment. The population is increasing, the labor force is increasing, but the job opportunities are not being created at the same pace, causing unemployment and poverty. Low rate of growth. The rate of economic growth has been very slow, as such that it has failed to keep up with the rising labor force and generating employment opportunities and providing basic amenities to the rising population. Capital deficiency. India being a poor country where resources are deficient, we cannot take up production activities on a large scale. We cannot go for expansion and development of agriculture, industries, creation of services in service sector due to lack of capital needed for investment. Rural indebtedness. Large number of people residing in the rural areas are in debt. They are unable to meet their basic economic activities and needs on a daily basis. They take loan from informal agents, and inability to repay of the loan leads them into a debt trap, making poorer than before. Exploitation under the British colonial rule. 300 years of British colonial rule has drained away of our resources, and it took us time to revive from that state of devastation where we had to begin from scrap. Low education. The literacy level is low. People are uneducated, hence they find it difficult to secure job and hence have low income to fulfill their needs and requirement. Inflationary pressure, rising prices makes it difficult for people to meet their requirements and necessities. High level of migration from rural areas. People in large numbers migrate from rural to urban areas in search of job opportunities, whereas in urban areas they are still facing challenges. This leads to overcrowding, lack of unplanned growth in the cities, increase in the number of slums, lack of basic amenities, causing poverty. Failure to introduce land reform. The government failed to introduce the land reform measures effectively. That has led to poverty as the tillers did not get the ownership rights, they could not become self-sufficient and independent. They had difficult time in becoming self-dependent and economically dependent to take care of their basic requirements for their existence. That is all for today's class discussing the causes of poverty. Next class will deal with the remedial measures to overcome poverty. Please take care. Be safe. Thank you.